Silas Granger, 61, had outlived everyone who once believed he wouldn't make it past 30. He sat on the splintered porch of his ranch house, boots caked in dust, pipe long gone cold between his teeth, staring out across the dry Wyoming plain like it might finally offer him a reason to leave it all behind. The wind that stirred the brittle grass carried no promise, only the whisper of ghosts, old friends buried under shallow dirt, lovers long lost to memory, and regrets that refused to stay dead. The land was dying slow, same as him. The barn leaned like a drunk against the sky. The well had gone shallow, and his horse was too old to ride far, and too proud to die easy. Silas hadn't spoken to another soul in over 3 months, and he liked it that way. Peace was a lonely thing, but at least it didn't talk back. Then he saw the dust trail. 6 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the low sun, moving with purpose, not like bandits, and not like salesmen. He stood slowly, knees crackling like dry twigs. His hand went to the rifle resting by the door, out of habit, not intent. They weren't close enough yet to see faces, but his gut already knew this wasn't trouble in the usual shape. This was different. This was wrong. They came in quiet, reining in at the front of his porch with practiced grace. All women, young, late teens to mid-20s, each one different in dress and bearing, but something about the way they looked at him, steadfast, unafraid, eyes locked on his, made his spine go stiff. The one in front dismounted first. Dark braid, dusty coat, boots that had seen more miles than a cavalry mule. She stepped up to the porch, stopped 3 feet from him, and said, "Are you Silas Granger?" Silas nodded once, slow. Another one, taller, with amber eyes and wind-burned cheeks, stepped forward. "Because we think you're our father." Silas blinked. Once. Twice. The words didn't make it past the armor around his heart. He wanted to laugh, to spit, to tell them they had the wrong man. But then the last one, the smallest, with eyes like summer storms, pulled a folded letter from her coat and held it out with both hands. "It's from our mother, Evelyn Marrow." The name hit him like a bullet to the ribs. He didn't take the letter. He just stood there, still as stone, the pipe dropping from his mouth and shattering on the porch. 6 pairs of eyes watched him. And for the first time in decades, Silas Granger was afraid. Not of death, not of violence, but of what came next. They hadn't come for money. That was the first thing Silas Granger realized as he stared into the eyes of the 6 women standing before him. If they'd wanted the ranch, they'd have come with papers and lawyers or guns. But these girls rode like they'd crossed hell itself to get here. Sunburned, dirty, tired down to the bone. Whatever they were after, it wasn't land. It was something deeper, something that made his throat tighten. The one who'd spoken first, dark braid, steady hands, introduced herself as Maeve. "We've been looking for you," she said, voice low and level, like she wasn't used to being questioned. "A long time." Silas didn't answer. He took the letter with a hand that felt strangely foreign to him, like it belonged to someone else. The parchment was soft with age, edges curled. Her handwriting hit him before the words did. Evelyn Marrow, sharp and flowing. He could still see her hunched over the corner table of that cabin in Nebraska, ink staining her fingers, hair tied back with a red ribbon. God, that ribbon. He'd kept it for years. Lost it in a poker game he barely remembers. He read the first line and had to sit down. If you're reading this, Silas, then they found you. I hope you haven't gone mean enough to send them away. He stopped. Couldn't read anymore. The ache in his chest wasn't grief. It was shame. A dull, familiar kind. The kind he'd nursed like an old dog that wouldn't die. How do you know she was talking about me? He asked, not looking up. Maeve exchanged a glance with the one called Ivy, who pulled something from her saddlebag. A journal. Weathered leather, cracked spine. She handed it to him, open to a page where his name was written again and again in Evelyn's hand, like she was afraid someone might forget it. She told us stories, Ivy said softly, about a man who rode like a ghost and shot straighter than the law. Said he was stubborn, mean, and brave. Said he'd call us strangers, even if he knew in his bones we weren't. Silas stared down at the journal. His name looked too clean on the page. Too kind. Delilah, the quiet one, stepped forward. We didn't come to take anything from you. We just wanted to know if it was true. What? That we came from someone worth remembering. Silas felt the wind shift. The sky stretched wide and open above them, as if waiting for an answer. He looked at these women, dust on their boots, hope in their eyes, and felt the years he'd buried claw their way back up through his ribs. He didn't say yes, but he didn't send them away. And that, for Silas Granger, was already more than he'd planned on giving. Silas didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of rye and Evelyn's letter, reading the words over and over until the lantern burned low and the edges of the paper blurred into shadows. Outside, the wind carried dust across the yard and rattled the windows like a warning. But Silas stayed still, elbows on the table, eyes sinking into every sentence she'd left behind. I never told you because I knew you wouldn't stay, she'd written, and I needed you to stay dead if I was going to raise them right. He'd thought she was angry when she vanished. Turns out, she was scared. He didn't remember falling asleep, but when morning came, he woke with a sore neck and 6 silent shadows standing in his doorway. They'd let themselves in, bold, familiar, like they belonged. Maeve handed him a mug of coffee and sat down across from him, like she owned the damn table. You didn't say no, she said. Silas grunted, more at the taste of the coffee than the words. Didn't say yes either. Willa, the youngest, barely 20 by his guess, stood by the window tracing her finger through the condensation on the glass. She'd drawn a flower, same damn flower Evelyn used to doodle in the margins of her letters. He stared at it longer than he meant to. We want to know about her, Maeve said. The part of her before us. The part you had. Silas rubbed his face. His beard scratched against his palm like dry brush. You want stories? No, Delilah replied. We want truth. That was harder. Truth wasn't what you told. It was what you remembered, in the quiet when nobody was asking. And Silas had buried most of it deep. Still, something cracked. She came into my life like a dust storm, he muttered. Didn't ask permission, just filled every corner I had left. His voice rasped against his throat, unused to softness. We had one summer. She was smarter than me, knew it, never rubbed it in. She'd hum when she cooked, curse when she rode, and drink me under the table if the mood was right. Then I left. The room went still. You didn't know about us? Ivy asked. No. He swallowed hard. If I had, I'd have come back. I swear it. They didn't look convinced. Why should they? He barely convinced himself. Sadie leaned against the wall, arms crossed, voice tight. So why now? Why stay now? Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out something he hadn't touched in 15 years. A small, carved music box. Evelyn's. Still smelled faintly of lavender and sweat and pine. He set it on the table and opened the lid. The tune was off-key and slow, but they all turned toward it like it was church. "You tell me," Silas said. And for the first time, no one asked him to explain. Silas watched them from the porch that evening, all 6 scattered across the ranch yard, like they'd lived there their whole lives. Maeve was tending to the horses without being asked. Ivy sat in the dirt, sketching something in a little notebook. Delilah walked the fence line with her hands in her pockets, studying every broken post like she planned to fix them herself. The others talked in low voices near the well, boots kicking up dust, laughter cracking open the quiet like thunder on dry ground. They didn't feel like strangers anymore, and that scared the hell out of him. He hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't welcomed them, blessed them, or claimed a damn thing. But the house smelled like coffee and hair soap, and someone had washed the pan he hadn't touched in 3 weeks. The silence he'd clung to for years had been split apart by voices. Soft ones, sharp ones, too many of them sounding like Evelyn when she was mad. He sat with his boots propped up and his rifle across his lap. Not loaded, not out of threat. Just habit. When Sadie came up the steps, she didn't ask to sit. She just did. "Was it always this quiet?" she asked. Silas gave her a side glance. "What do you think?" "I think it's the kind of quiet that keeps men from sleeping." He grunted. She wasn't wrong. Sadie pulled something from her coat pocket. A torn ribbon, sun-bleached and fraying at the edges. She turned it over in her fingers like a coin. "Mama said you gave her this. Said you tied it around her wrist before riding off to war. Said you promised to come back." Silas's throat dried out. "I didn't think I was coming back." "You didn't," she said flatly. "Not for a long time." The weight of it settled between them. Truth was never soft, never polite. It was heavy and sharp and real, and Sadie didn't flinch from it. "I didn't know about any of you," he said again, quieter this time. "But if I had, I wouldn't have stayed gone." She looked at him, long and hard, like she could see the man he used to be under all the rust. "Don't matter now," she said. "We're here, and we're not going anywhere. Not yet." He nodded slowly. That part, at least, he was starting to believe. Sadie stood. She looked at the others, still scattered across his land, like seeds blown in by fate. "We didn't come to take what's yours," she said over her shoulder. "We came to find what's ours." Silas didn't answer. He just watched the sun dip behind the hills, painting the sky in blood and honey. He thought he'd buried his past deep enough. But now, it walked, breathed, and called him father. And it wasn't done digging. Silas Granger stood in the doorway of the barn, arms crossed, the smell of old hay and leather settling in his lungs. The names still echoed in his ears, 6 of them, spoken one after the other like a sermon he hadn't asked for. Delilah, Maeve, Ivy, Sadie, Willa, Tamsin. Each name struck like a match to dry grass, and the fires they lit burned through memories he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. Delilah, the quiet one with eyes like smoke, moved like Evelyn used to. Shoulders squared, never rushing, always measuring. Maeve, the one who led without needing permission, had her mother's fire. The same steel spine that once cursed a cavalry officer to his face and walked away untouched. Ivy smiled soft and slow, but her eyes were busy, cataloging the world like a ledger. Sadie had a knife on her belt and a chip on her shoulder. Willa's laugh broke through silence like birdsong after a long winter. And Tamsin. Tamsin carried herself like someone always expecting the worst, like she'd seen the world blink and flinch. He hadn't known them, but somehow he did. That was the hardest part. They gathered in the house that evening, sitting on the floor or leaning against walls, plates of stew in their laps. Silas didn't speak much, just sat in the corner with a glass of rye, listening. Delilah pulled out a folded scrap of paper from her coat. Old, creased, nearly torn at the corners. "She wrote all our names down," she said. "Said they came from you." Silas frowned. "Me?" "She said you told her once. If you ever had daughters, these were the names you liked." He closed his eyes. "Damn her!" It was true. Years ago, drunk on cheap whiskey and Evelyn's smile, he'd spoken the names aloud like some foolish prayer. She'd laughed, called him sentimental, but she'd remembered. And now here they were, 6 pieces of a life he never lived. She kept them together, Ivy said, as long as she could. Then when she got sick, she told us to find you. Said if you were still alive, we'd know it when he opened the door, and looked like the ghost of every story she ever told. Silas rubbed his temples. He didn't know how to carry any of this. Didn't know if he was supposed to feel proud or angry or broken in half. "You ain't asking for money," he said. Maeve shook her head. "We're asking for truth." "That's harder to give." "We can take it." He looked at them, 6 women, all raised by ghosts and scraps of memory, and felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, but weight, gravity. "All right," he said, voice low. "Then we start with names, and we see what truth comes after." The next morning, Silas didn't reach for his rifle. He reached for his father's shaving mirror, cracked at the corner, and tried to remember what his face looked like before the years turned it to leather. He didn't shave, just stared. Still him, but not. The man Evelyn knew had been lean and full of fire. This one was worn down to the frame. He stepped outside and found Maeve already chopping wood. She swung the axe like she'd done it all her life. Each strike clean, efficient, no wasted motion. "Someone teach you that?" he asked. She wiped her brow with her sleeve. "A man named Ellis. Ran a horse farm in Kansas. Took me in when I was 12. Said hard work made you honest." "He right." "Hard work just makes you tired," she said. "Truth's in the scars." He didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. By noon, the others had gathered in the barn. Ivy laid out a small collection of keepsakes on a saddle blanket, items Evelyn had left with each of them. Proof, if not by blood, then by memory. Delilah placed a music box beside an old cavalry badge. Willa added a tin of lavender salve with initials carved faintly into the lid. Sadie dropped a torn photograph. Silas, younger, arms slung around Evelyn's waist, both of them looking away from the camera like they had somewhere better to be. Tamsin held out a yellowing Bible. Inside the cover, "To my girls, born of one fire, scattered to many winds." Silas stared at the items, throat dry. Where'd she keep all this? "Split between 6 women," Ivy said. "Each one raised one of us. Evelyn made a pact. If anything happened to her, we weren't to be sent to an orphanage. Said we'd find our way back to each other eventually." "And to me?" "She wasn't sure you were still alive, but she hoped." Sadie stepped forward then. "We don't need you to say it if it's too much, but we do need to know." "Know what? If there's a piece of you in us, or if we're just chasing ghosts." Silas looked at the music box. He remembered the night he gave it to Evelyn. She'd cried, not because of the gift, but because no man had ever given her something beautiful without strings. He looked at the Bible, the salve, the photo, the badge. The weight of them crushed him, not like a burden, but like truth finally breaking through a dam. "You want a blood test?" he asked. "This is the frontier. We don't have one." Delilah nodded. "So give us what we do have." Silas pulled a locket from around his neck, opened it. Inside, a curl of red hair, faded, still hers. "She was the only thing I ever loved and lost," he said quietly. "And I only ever said it once. That might be the truest part of me in any of you." No one spoke, but no one walked away either. The rain came in slow, lazy sheets that afternoon, soaking the fields and softening the dust into thick red clay. Silas stood just inside the barn doors, watching the sky weep over land that hadn't seen a drop in weeks. The girls were scattered again, Willa chasing chickens into the coop, Tamsin oiling a saddle, Maeve leaning against a post with her hat pulled low. None of them seemed bothered by the rain. Silas lit a match with his thumb and touched it to the edge of his pipe, staring out at the curtain of water like it owed him something. Maybe it did. Maybe it owed him a lifetime of apologies. He closed his eyes, and she came back. Evelyn, barefoot in a wheat field. Evelyn, laughing in the back of a freight wagon. Evelyn, on her knees by the fire, stitching up the bullet hole in his arm, telling him to shut up and stop flinching like a baby. One summer. That's all they'd had. 3 months, tucked between the war and the world. He remembered the way she kissed, rough, like she was angry about it, and the way she whispered names into the dark. Delilah, if it's a girl, or Sadie, or Ivy. You pick the rest, Silas. I just want them to sound like freedom. He hadn't known she was serious. Back then, he hadn't been serious about anything. Just a drifter in a blue coat, living off charm and aimless luck. She'd been the first person to see past the grin, the only one who called his bluff and made him like it. He'd told himself the war would only last a year. He told her he'd write. He didn't. Not once. He opened his eyes and looked at the sky. "I didn't know," he muttered aloud, as if the rain might carry the words back to her. Delilah appeared beside him without a sound. She didn't speak, just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Her face was unreadable, but she didn't need to say anything. "I should have looked for her," Silas said quietly. "Should have gone back." "She knew you wouldn't," Delilah replied. "She said the world made you hard, not cruel. There's a difference." He let the words settle. She forgave you, Delilah added softer now. Every day. Even when we didn't. Silas swallowed something sharp. Why? Because you gave her the one good summer she ever had. He turned to look at her then. Really look. And for the first time, he saw it. The slope of her jaw, the angle of her brow. She looked nothing like Evelyn, but she felt like her. You don't have to be her to carry her, he said. I know, Delilah said, but it helps to know where I come from. They stood in silence as the rain softened to mist. Silas glanced back out at the field. I guess I owe her more than I'll ever be able to pay. Delilah looked him dead in the eye. Then start with us. The moon hung low over the ridge that night, full and pale, casting a cold silver light across the ranch like a watchful eye. The house creaked softly in the wind, old bones settling. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, throwing shadows across the walls where the 6 daughters of Silas Granger sat around the hearth like a council. Silas stayed back, half hidden in the kitchen doorway, arms folded. He wasn't used to listening without speaking, watching without judging. But something about the way they moved, the way they passed the bottle around like it was sacred, he couldn't look away. Willa spoke first. Mama called it the Pact of the Mothers. The others nodded. Tamsin reached into her coat and pulled out a folded page, worn and yellowed, brittle at the corners. She laid it on the floor between them. She had us spread out, 6 different women, in 6 different towns. Said it was safer that way. Said keeping us together would have made us easy to find if the wrong people ever came looking. Silas stepped closer, the floor groaning under his weight. Who'd come looking? He asked low. Maeve didn't flinch. Men from your past, or hers. You weren't the only one with enemies, Silas. Sadie's voice was dry. One of 'em tried. When I was 10, the woman raising me put a knife in his throat before he got through the door. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. He hadn't known. He hadn't imagined. In his mind, Evelyn had simply gone quiet. He'd never considered she'd gone into hiding. She told each of our guardians to teach us different things, Ivy said. One learned books. One learned horses. One learned guns. Mama said we'd need every kind of knowledge if we were going to make it back to you. And if I was dead? Silas asked. Then we were to find each other, Willa said gently. That was always the end of the plan. Come together, no matter what. He looked at them then. These 6 women, built from scraps of Evelyn's strength, each shaped by fire and silence, and the kind of upbringing no child should have to survive. He saw the lines of pain in their faces, but also the defiance, the fire. I thought she hated me, Silas said, for leaving, for not writing, for not coming back. She didn't, Tamsin said, matter of fact. She just stopped waiting. The truth of it gutted him, not because it was cruel, but because it was fair. Delilah refolded the letter, placing it back in the tin she carried like a reliquary. She said, if we ever found you, to look you in the eye and tell you this, the world made you hard, Silas, but you never once scared me. That's why I loved you. He closed his eyes and felt it hit, like a fist to the chest or a hand on the shoulder after too long alone. And for the first time in a long, bitter life, Silas Granger didn't feel like a ghost. He felt found. The knock came just after sunrise. One of those hard, flat knocks that didn't ask permission. It announced itself. Silas opened the door to find a man in a clean duster and polished boots, standing with the kind of posture that said he owned something, even if it wasn't his. He had a badge clipped to his vest and a smirk carved deep into his cheeks. Behind him were two more men on horseback, eyes hidden under low-brimmed hats, rifles strapped across their saddles like polite suggestions. "Silas Granger," the man said. "Name's Judge Remy Graft. I believe we've got business." Silas didn't blink. "I don't reckon we do." "You do now," Graft said, slipping a folded paper from his coat. "Filed with the county office 3 days ago. There's a claim on your property. Says your will is invalid, that you've got no legal heirs. And if that's true, this land becomes property of the territory at month's end." Silas took the paper, but didn't look at it. "You come all this way to tell me that?" Graff smiled, teeth too white for a man who worked in the law. "Number I came to see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That 6 girls rolled up out of nowhere, calling you daddy." He glanced past Silas into the house. "Mighty strange coincidence, especially with no official record of a wife or children or a will filed with a proper seal." "They've got names," Silas said coldly. "Names don't mean much out here. Proof does." Before Silas could answer, Maeve appeared behind him. She didn't speak, just stood tall, her presence like a drawn blade. Graff's eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. Not lecherous, calculating. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" Maeve tilted her head. "The one that'll be carved on your tombstone if you call me that again." Silas almost smiled. Almost. Graff gave a short, humorless laugh. "Feisty. You breed 'em that way, Granger?" Silas stepped out onto the porch, the paper still in his hand. "You done?" "Not yet. I'm giving you a choice. You contest the claim, and it goes to court. Public court. Every bad thing you ever did gets dragged into daylight. Or you sign it over now, keep your girls from the embarrassment, and ride out quiet." "And let you have the land?" Silas asked. "Territory needs it for expansion. You're a stubborn weed growing in the middle of a gold road, Silas." Silas looked past him, toward the barn where the others had gathered, watching. "You ever dig up a weed that didn't fight back?" he asked. Graff tipped his hat. "See you in court." They rode off without looking back. Silas stood on the porch long after the dust had settled. The girls joined him one by one. None of them asked what the paper said. They didn't have to. Trouble had found them, and this time it wore the badge of law. Maeve didn't wait for permission. She slammed the barn doors open that afternoon and started hauling fence posts into the yard like they owed her money. Willa trailed behind, arms full of rusted tools, breathless but determined. Ivy was already kneeling by the chicken coop, sketching plans in the dirt. None of them said it out loud, but the message was clear. If they were going to lose the ranch, they'd lose it fighting. Silas watched from the porch, pipe clenched between his teeth, aching in places he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to stop them, tell them it was no use, that lawmen like Remy Graft didn't lose, because they didn't play fair. But they moved like thunder, like women with roots, not just boots. And watching them fix his busted fence with blistered hands and sheer willpower, made something tighten in his chest. "I thought you said you weren't staying," he muttered. Maeve didn't look up. "We're not." Willa grinned. "But we ain't leaving either." That night, over stew and whiskey, Maeve laid the map on the kitchen table. It wasn't a map of the land. It was a map of the legal fight ahead. Territory boundaries, old claim lines, names of judges, every weakness Graft might try to use. "Ivy's been writing to a lawyer in Cheyenne," Maeve said. "One who doesn't take bribes." "Ivy's been doing what?" Silas asked. Ivy shrugged. "Mama always said hope's good, but paper's better." Sadie pulled her boots off and slammed them near the fire. "And if the paper don't work, I know how to make a man bleed without leaving a mark." Willa looked horrified. Tamsin looked intrigued. Silas leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "You girls really think you can outfight a judge?" "No," Delilah said, voice calm. "But we can outlast him." Silas stared at her, and something inside him moved. Not pride exactly, not yet, but damn close. Then came the gunshot. Sharp, clean, close. Everyone froze. Maeve was the first to move. She stepped outside into the moonlight with her revolver drawn before Silas could stop her. Out by the front gate, a man on horseback waved his rifle in the air and shouted loud enough to wake the mountain. "This land ain't yours anymore," he called. "Pack up and ride out while you still got boots." Silas walked outside slowly, calmly. He didn't bother drawing, just lit a match against the post and lit his pipe. "You fire one more shot near this house," he said evenly, "and you'll be picking teeth out of your piss for a week." The man laughed once, then turned and rode off, dust kicking behind him. Silas looked at Maeve. She was still holding her gun, steady as sunrise. He nodded. Good shot wouldn't scare him off, but a woman who doesn't flinch? That might? She holstered her pistol. "You should have taught us that sooner." Silas looked out over the dark horizon, the place where trouble always came from. "Didn't know I had daughters worth teaching," he said. "Until now." The next morning brought Deputy Calder riding in slow, his horse lathered, and his face drawn tight as rawhide. He didn't dismount right away, just sat there in the yard, watching Silas like a man balancing on the edge of a blade. Silas stepped out onto the porch, mug of black coffee in hand. That horse didn't run all the way out here for a social call. Calder finally swung down. He was young for the badge, too clean, too careful, but Silas had always pegged him for a good one, the kind that still believed the law was meant to protect. "I came to warn you," Calder said, voice low. "There's a motion filed to declare your will fraudulent. Graft's pushing it through fast, real fast. Says the girls are imposters." Maeve appeared behind Silas, arms folded, face unreadable. The others stepped into view a moment later, quiet but present. Calder took them all in with a glance, and his jaw tightened. "I've seen them around town," he said. "Don't strike me as liars." "Then you're smarter than your boss," Sadie snapped. Calder held up a hand. "He's not my boss. Graft's got pull, but he's not law. Not really." "Then why's he acting like it?" Tamsin asked. Calder hesitated. "Because the territory's about to be redrawn. Railroads coming in. Silver speculation. That ranch sits dead center in a parcel worth more than you know. If he gets it under territorial control, he can sell it to the companies without oversight." Silas took a slow sip of coffee. So, he cuts me out by calling these girls liars. Says I've got no heirs, no claim. Calder nodded grimly. And he's paying a man named Elridge Dobb to testify. Says he knew you back in the day. Claims Evelyn never had children. Says you made the whole thing up to keep the land from reverting. Silas scoffed. Elridge Dobb? That mule-faced bastard couldn't tell the truth if it was tattooed on his knuckles. Doesn't matter. Judge Sweeney'll listen to him. Graff's got the court wired tight. Ivy stepped forward, her voice calm but ice sharp. So what do we do? Calder looked at them, then back at Silas. You've got one chance. Prove blood. Testimony, letters, family likeness, anything that makes it impossible for a judge to deny they're yours. Willa bit her lip. That won't be enough, will it? Calder didn't answer. Silas looked out at the hills. For years that land had been nothing but dirt and ghosts. Now it held 6 futures, and every one of them was under threat. He turned back to the deputy. Tell Graft if he wants to steal this land, he better bring more than a pen and a coward. Calder mounted up again. You'll need allies, Silas. Fast ones? We've got each other, Delilah said. Calder looked at her, then at Silas. Let's hope that's enough. He rode off without another word. And Silas Granger, for the first time in decades, realized something terrifying. He wasn't fighting for land anymore. He was fighting for family. They packed the town hall like it was Judgment Day. The hearing wasn't supposed to draw a crowd. Just a quiet procedural review in front of Judge Sweeney. One more box to tick on Remy Graff's march to conquest. But word had spread that the reclusive Silas Granger, the man everyone assumed would die alone and half-mad, had 6 daughters suddenly show up like a thunderclap from the past. That he was fighting the territorial government. That Graft meant to take his land, whether the blood ran cold or hot. By noon, the benches were full, and folks were standing along the walls. Farmers, ranchers, old-timers who'd ridden with Silas back when he still had fire in his eyes. Even a few who'd once called Evelyn Marrow a friend. They'd come not just to watch, but to remember. Silas stood at the front table in a pressed shirt that didn't quite fit anymore, flanked by all 6 daughters. Maeve to his right, Delilah to his left. The others ranged like sentinels. It was the first time they'd all been seen together in town, and it showed. The resemblance was subtle, tilts of the chin, the way their shoulders squared, the same glint of stubbornness behind the eyes. But it was there. Graft arrived with a show. Clean boots, silver tie pin, smugness wrapped around him like a cloak. He tipped his hat to the judge, offered a practiced smile to the room, and dropped his briefcase on the table like it contained the final nail in someone's coffin. Judge Sweeney, round-bellied and red-faced, looked over the paperwork with a weary sigh. We're here to settle the matter of land inheritance and heir legitimacy for one Silas Granger. Silas stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and laid down Evelyn's letter on the judge's bench. I didn't know about them, he said, voice rough but clear. Not until a week ago, but they are mine. And I'm naming them as heirs, same as if I'd raised them myself. Graff stood before the judge could respond. Your Honor, we have sworn testimony from one Elridge Dobb. Claims Mr. Granger fabricated this entire story to prevent the land from being reclaimed. No marriage certificate, no birth records, no legal proof. Sweeney grunted. We're not in Boston, Graft. We're in Carbon County. Not everyone keeps a file drawer of memories." Ivy rose and placed a stack of letters on the table. Evelyn's handwriting, dated and addressed, photographs, a copy of the music box receipt from a general store in Ogallala, a locket with Evelyn's initials engraved inside. One by one, each daughter offered something, a story, a shared phrase, a scar. Then Maeve stepped forward and said the one thing that silenced the room. "She told us you wouldn't believe us, that men like you would want paper. But my father doesn't speak with ink. He speaks with silence and grit and the things he didn't say." Silas's jaw tightened. Graft leaned in. "Your Honor, this is sentiment, not fact." Sweeney raised a hand. "It's both." Then he turned to Silas. "Are you willing to formalize this? On record?" Silas nodded. "I brought my will." He laid it on the bench, signed in black ink, 6 names spelled out in hard, careful handwriting. Judge Sweeney read it, then looked at the daughters. "Then let it be entered into the record. These 6 women, Delilah, Maeve, Ivy, Sadie, Willa, and Tamsin, are the legal heirs of Silas Granger." A murmur swept the room. Graft turned gray beneath his tan, and Silas didn't smile. He just reached over and squeezed Maeve's hand. Hard, like a man claiming something he'd lost and didn't deserve to find again. They found the blood in the dirt before they found her boot. Tamsin had gone out just after dawn to check the northern fence line. She said she wanted quiet, said she needed to clear her head. Silas had offered to go with her, but she just smiled that half smile and told him, "I'm not the one who needs protection, old man." By mid-morning, she hadn't come back. Delilah found her tracks veering off toward the ravine. Drag marks in the grass, a broken rifle strap, then the blood, dark and drying fast, and her left boot, lying on its side like it had been ripped off in struggle. Maeve crouched over the scene, fingers pressed to the dirt. 2 men, she said, eyes scanning the horizon, took her northeast, toward Lyric Ridge. Sadie was already at the barn, slamming shells into her shotgun. Silas didn't speak. He just saddled his horse with the kind of precision that meant something terrible was about to happen. Willa stood in the doorway, shaking. "Why would they take her?" Silas mounted up, jaw tight. "Because Graft lost in court, and now he's playing a different hand." "They're using her as ransom?" Ivy asked. "No," Delilah said darkly. "They're using her as bait." By the time the sun broke through the clouds, the Granger family rode, 6 horses thundering over dry earth, led by a man with murder in his eyes and a heart that had waited too damn long to lose something again. Lyric Ridge was a half-day's ride if you were slow. They weren't. They reached the edge of the canyon as shadows stretched long across the ground. Silas raised a hand, halting the others behind him. Below, in the narrow gulch between crumbling cliffs, stood 2 men, and a third slumped over beside a campfire. Tamsin, gagged and tied, blood streaked across her temple. Maeve reached for her pistol. "Not yet," Silas said. One of the men looked up. "Granger," he called, "you brought the cavalry." Silas rode down the ridge slow, steady, rifle resting across his saddle horn. "She ain't yours to take," he said. "Neither is the land," the man replied. "But here we are." He kicked Tamsin hard enough to make her gasp. "You hand over the deed, we let her go." Silas dismounted. then tossed his rifle to the ground. Behind him, 6 rifles cocked in unison from the ridge above. "You boys made one mistake," Silas said, stepping closer. "You thought I'd trade land for blood." The man reached for his weapon. A gunshot cracked the canyon wide open. Delilah had fired, straight through the man's shoulder. He dropped screaming as Maeve and Sadie stormed down the hill like thunder on legs. The second man raised his hands and backed away fast. Ivy already had him in her sights. Silas ran to Tamsin and cut her free. Her eyes were dazed but defiant. "You came," she whispered. He held her close, heart hammering. "Course I did." And this time, he hadn't been too late. They rode back from Larrick Ridge as the sun bled into the horizon, streaking the sky with bruised oranges and fire-red scars. The wind had teeth by the time they reached the ranch, but nobody spoke of the cold. Tamsin rode with her arms wrapped around Silas's waist, silent but breathing, her temple bandaged in a strip of Maeve's shirt. The blood had stopped, but the message hadn't. This wasn't about land anymore. This was war. The girls moved like a unit now. No more awkward introductions or careful distance. They rode together, fought together, moved like blood had always been between them. Silas saw it in the way Delilah handed Sadie her spare knife without a word. In the way Willa kept glancing at Tamsin like she might disappear again if she looked away too long. And in the way Maeve now walked a few paces ahead of him, like she'd taken it upon herself to absorb the next bullet before it could ever find him. When they reached the barn, Silas slid off his horse and nearly buckled from the weight of it all. Not just the ride, not just the rescue, but the truth. They were his, every one of them, not in some poetic, abstract way, in the way that mattered, the way that changed a man. He turned to Maeve. "I should have never let her go alone." "She didn't let you do anything," Maeve said. "She's your daughter, not your prisoner." Silas looked at Tamsin, who was now curled up by the hearth inside, drinking slow sips of broth from Ivy's hands. Her bruises were swelling, her lip was split, but her eyes clear as morning. "You all right?" he asked her gently. "I've had worse," she said, "but I never had someone come back for me before." Silas knelt beside her. "You do now." Outside, the others began unloading supplies. Sadie nailed the barn doors shut with iron bar reinforcements. Willa fed the horses and locked every gate on the property. Delilah stood guard, rifle across her shoulder, like it belonged there. Inside, Silas poured a measure of rye and raised it toward the fire. "We make our stand here," he said. "No more running, no more hiding. If Graft wants this land, he'll have to take it from a family, not a ghost." Maeve sat across from him, eyes sharp. "And if he brings more than 2 men next time?" Silas looked around the room, at his 6 daughters, hardened not by blood, but by fire. "Then he better bring an army." Outside, thunder rumbled across the plains. But in that house, for the first time in decades, Silas Granger felt something he thought he'd buried with Evelyn Marrow. He felt ready. The fire cracked low, spitting embers into the dark, and Silas Granger sat in its glow with 6 daughters circled close, worn, bruised, alive. The storm outside had broken, but the storm inside him still howled. Not fear, not anymore. Something bigger. Something he'd forgotten how to carry. Love. They hadn't asked him to say it. hadn't begged for apologies or forced him to dredge up every sin. They just sat there, quiet, warm, waiting, as if giving him space to come to them on his own terms. He stared into the flames, bottle in one hand, Evelyn's old locket in the other. "She used to hum when she was angry," he said finally, voice hoarse. "Not when she was happy, when she was trying not to scream." Maeve gave a small nod. "We know. She once told me love was like horses. If you held too tight, it bolted. Too loose, it wandered." "That sounds like her," Ivy whispered. Silas swallowed. "I didn't come back after the war, because I thought I'd broken her, that she was better off." Tamsin reached forward and took the locket from his hand, thumb tracing the worn clasp. "She was never better off. She just got better at pretending." Silas let the silence stretch. He owed them more than words, but this would have to be the start. "I'm sorry," he said, "for every year I wasn't there, for not fighting harder to find her, to find you." Willa's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stood and walked to the small cedar box near the hearth. From it, she pulled out a bundle, cloth wrapped and tied with fraying ribbon. One by one, the girls began to pull out small objects Evelyn had given them over the years. A pocket knife, a folded map, a deck of cards, a broken compass, a blue scarf, and finally, a silver ring worn smooth by time. "She called them pieces of you," Delilah said. "Said she didn't have much to give, so she gave us echoes." Maeve rose and stood before him. "But we don't want echoes, Silas." She bent to one knee. The others followed, kneeling one by one around the fire, each placing their item in front of him like offerings on an altar. "We want you," Maeve finished. "Now, whatever time's left." Silas looked at them. 6 sets of eyes fixed on him. Some hard, some soft, but all of them shining. He tried to speak, but nothing came. So he reached for the ring, slipped it onto Maeve's finger with a shaking hand. Then he went to each of them in turn. A word, a touch, a name remembered. And when he finished, he stood there, firelight flickering against his weathered face. "You've got me," he said. And for the first time in a long, hard life, he said it like he meant it. Silas Granger died with the sunrise warming his boots and the scent of fresh bread in the air. He went the way most men dream of but few deserve, quiet, clean, and surrounded by the very people he once thought he'd never meet. No pain, no fight, just a long exhale in the rocking chair on the porch, his hat tilted low, hands folded gently across his chest like he was still holding something precious. Maybe he was. It was Willa who found him just after the coffee boiled. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stepped inside the house and said, "He's gone." The others came out in silence. Maeve touched his shoulder and whispered something no one else could hear. Delilah picked up his pipe and turned it over in her hand like a relic. Sadie sat on the step and stared at the horizon, eyes wet but jaw firm. Ivy laid the old locket across his chest. Tamsin wiped his boots clean one last time. They buried him beneath the cottonwood tree by the northern fence line. The same one he'd planted the year Evelyn left, when he still believed he'd see her again. The soil there was softer than most of the land, like it had been waiting. The headstone was simple, carved by Maeve's hand. Silas Granger, father, fighter, forgiven. People came, more than expected, ranchers, drifters, townsfolk. Even Deputy Calder stood at the edge of the service, hat in hand, his eyes misted over. No one talked about the land dispute, or graft, or the railroad. Those stories could wait. This was about a man who'd gone to his grave with something whole, again, in his chest. The daughters stayed after the others left. They sat beneath the tree, boots in the dirt, 6 women bound not just by blood, but by choice. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. As the sun dropped low, Maeve finally stood. "We keep the land," she said. The others nodded. "No one takes this from us," Delilah added. "Not now, not ever." In the weeks that followed, the ranch changed, but not in ways the world could measure. The fence was mended, the barn rebuilt. Laughter started to echo from the windows again. Evelyn's music box was placed on the mantel, where it would stay. Silas's rocking chair remained on the porch, always facing west. And every evening, one of them would sit in it for a while, just to keep it from forgetting. They ran the ranch together. 6 hands, 1 legacy. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. Because in the end, Silas Granger hadn't left behind land, or cattle, or coin. He left them. And they were the kind of inheritance no one could take.